Welcome, everybody, to the IDK WTF I'm doing podcast. My name is David B.
Anastasia Button, and we are going to have a pretty interesting topic today. We're going to talk about what we have learned 25 episodes into our podcast. What's it like to be a host? What's it like to be learning all these things? Because as the podcast title is, we don't know what the fuck we're doing either.
Yeah.
So we want to kind of bring a little transparency into what it's been like for us, at least, down this journey.
I think it's a good thing to talk about. I get questions about podcasting a lot, like, oh, is it hard? Is it this? Is it that? Or there people think it's like super easy. And they're like, I'm gonna go start a podcast. I'm like, okay.
Well, to their credit, it is easier than, say, a YouTube channel, right? Because you're dealing more with the audio platform versus straight up storytelling through video and visual. So yeah, it is a different mode of storytelling and having conversations and talking about topics, but it has other challenges for sure.
Yeah. I think it's there's more work involved with it than I expected. I didn't think it was going to be really easy peasy, but just there's a lot of technical things, especially when it comes to technology, like such as today, where we couldn't get your video and audio working in Zoom, so we have to splice a second camera angle into it.
Yep.
Which works.
But it's fine.
And we learned how to do multiple camera angles early, so it's definitely something doable.
You know, that is to say, if all of the camera things work, you know.
Yeah.
It is working, so we'll see how it goes.
Okay, as I check to see if we're actually recording.
Right. And that's the other thing we've learned. Like, we recorded a good 15 minutes of one podcast, and we weren't even actually recording it.
Yeah.
You know,
rookie mistake.
Like rookie kind of stuff. But, you know, I think also how we launched this podcast is also a contributing factor, because not everybody's going to launch it the way we did with a big buildup. It's normally like, and we have a podcast, you know.
Yeah.
Well, when I say we, it was more you. We're like, we're doing it this way. And I was like, why? But it was totally beneficial. It was just fun. A hell of a lot of work to build that up.
Yeah. So I guess we can go with, you want to talk about like your top 5 favorite and top 5 least favorite things?
Let's talk about what's been the most surprising on the journey.
Most surprising?
Yeah.
So I think for me, do you have an answer right off the bat?
Sure.
Cool. Go for it.
So I think what was most surprising for me with getting this podcast together and then continuing the podcast is, there's actually a lot more time dedicated that you have to have on a weekly basis, in a sense. The recording piece, that's really the easy part. Recording your conversation, talking to your guests, mostly that is the easiest part itself. When it comes to making sure you have the thumbnail that works the best on not only Anchor / Spotify and Apple, but also on like YouTube, and then we have to have show notes, and they have to be captivating, and they have to be SEO, and it's just like creating a blog, but you got to also record, you got to schedule in your guests and make sure it all works well, and then all the tech works well. Like, there's just more time into it if you want to do a good job. And because, we want to do a good job so that our listeners feel like they're getting great value out of it. And they can't get the best value if they can't hear you clearly. And audio is just super scratchy, and it sounds like you're in a bank vault, like me right now, probably. A little echoey right now. So
better than it was literally an hour ago.
Yeah, we kind of, it was either we got audio or we just had camera. It wasn't going to be both. So it was like, yeah. So just having to deal with all of those things is a problem. So the reason I want to kind of compare that to, in the past, in a sense, one of my past grandfathers, like great-great-grandfather or something, he was a writer for this, what they call the newsletter. And it was kind of like what we have in terms of magazines, YouTube channel, blogs today. It was stories that wasn't going to go in the newspaper or into like a novel.
Okay.
So it's kind of like that blurry area that people would subscribe to. And so he would traipse the mountains for 3 months and collect stories from all these random people. And indigenous cultures and so on, and bring the stories back to the city for the rest of the year.
You said your grandfather did this?
One of my great-grandfathers. Yeah, like this is like the turn of the 20th century, like 1900s.
Okay.
And so that's how people got their stories, was that he would do all that stuff. So yeah, it took 3 months to collect the stories, but that was definitely something he enjoyed. And then coming back to the city, he would just write them all out, and then they would publish them out, based off dates.
Okay.
So he's putting in a lot of work, but that was his full-time job. This podcast is not our full-time job.
Exactly.
And it's like, and we're not making money from it, at least yet. And so it's like, he's getting paid to do all those things. And then he just has to write basically 12 articles a year. And then he was done. Mm-hmm. We're doing, twice a week and all this jazz. And so it takes a lot of time away from actually money-making activities that are current.
Yeah. And that's very true. And I'll say it's a lot of the little technical stuff that takes way more time than I would have expected. Mm-hmm. And like making sure things are right. Like you said, the thumbnails, making sure the audio, the file is the right size so that it can be uploaded.
Right.
And then even editing, because we're, again, not making money, so we're editing everything ourselves. I like to edit things for content to make sure it's like, the things make sense and I can take out the big gaps. And then you edit it and make it look pretty and make it like polished. So after it comes back from our editor, who puts the different camera angles together and syncs the sound correct. So it's like, that's process for a 1 hour episode, right? It's like, at least for me, it's like 2 hours of editing because I'm going through it like twice, if not longer, right?
Right. It takes me at least an hour and a half because you're technically watching the episode itself, which is an hour.
Yeah.
You're also spending the time to edit it.
Yeah. And stopping and going back. So at least twice as long.
And that doesn't even account the recording time too. So it takes some extra time. Back with my great grandpa, things were more simple, right? Mm-hmm. You just go collect the stories, write the stories, print the stories. Mm-hmm. So here we're having to deal with like 20 other steps.
Mm-hmm. And we've done a really good job, I think, at streamlining it as far as like bumping things around. Like my editor's gotten good because he's used to us now, so he can crank us out and get it back to us within 24 hours. Right. Cutting them from an hour episode into 2 parts to get twice as much content in half the time. I think that was a great idea.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I was hesitant at first, but I'm liking it, at least on an editing point of view. I'm like, it's more like the time saving that's been helping with that. You record for an hour and then editing only takes now an hour because it's shorter.
And then we technically have a week of content instead of a day of.
Exactly. So, I think that's also part of our lessons is really learning to maximize our time.
Mm-hmm. And personally, honestly, I would prefer to listen to a 20 to 30 minute podcast instead of an hour. And we we just don't talk for less than an hour.
Yeah.
Like we've tried.
We have like, really hard. Like with our guests, we're doing better.
Yeah, we got way better.
But because they're like, well, I only have this amount of time. We're like, okay.
Yep, crank it out. Let's crank out these questions.
Right.
So yeah, I totally agree. Any other big like chalks like, well, I did not expect that.
Honestly, I expected with all of our guests have been absolutely amazing. I've been a little surprised at how different in terms of preparation they are with the interview. Now, I don't mean the interview itself. I mean like sending me things like their photos and information and so on. Out of all of them so far, Trevor has been the absolutely best in terms of what he sent us, Trevor Mickelson. Yeah. I was, you and I were both like in awe when he sent his media kit. We're like, this is great. It literally had everything we needed. And I don't mean just URLs and a headshot and a bio. I mean, he had the short bio, the long bio, the really long bio.
Questions everything to ask, different links.
It was so helpful.
Links to like past interviews that he's done, which I found very helpful because I like researching beforehand.
Exactly.
And I was like, okay, look what I'm stealing and gonna copy for myself.
That is one of the biggest benefits I think we get out of this. And that's something that I kind of knew was going to happen, but I didn't quite know how, I guess, or what that would look like or feel like, is what we've learned from our guests as well. That's been really cool. And like with Trevor, yeah, that was a great experience in the interview, but my biggest takeaway was actually his media kit.
What's the number one thing you've learned through 25 episodes of podcasting? Well, this one dude's media kit was amazing.
Exactly. And I've also learned, on the editing side, what's the better headshot for the marketing. Okay. So like I'm not going to point names because I'd be a little embarrassed for them, but there's a couple of people we've had where, I'm going, okay, how does this headshot going to work in our template of our thumbnails, So we not only have to be flexible to what they may have, but also I'm kind of like, isn't there just like a standard headshot we can do that people could just submit, but everybody's got their own style. So it's just an interesting like collaboration problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something I enjoy, is like collaboration and like tweaking stuff and finding workarounds and sees. So I've enjoyed the variety of our guests, I will say. They're all so very different.
Very true. Right. But I think, in terms of you're also thinking, I know you're still thinking.
Yeah.
Problems with getting guests, that has been surprisingly difficult for me, at least on my end. I reached out to a bunch of people and got initial feedback saying, yes, they're going to go for it. And I was like, awesome. The second round was much more difficult because we've been a little choosy with our first guest. And I think that's still been smart. But it is more difficult when you're looking for the certain guest versus anyone just coming to you. And I've been the person that went to the podcast to be a guest on their podcast. So I know that process. So we just now opened up more people coming into our podcast. So I think that'll really help the guest problem. But literally I had people do email introductions up to like 30 people. And from one person, that was Jeremy, he sent out like 30 emails to these awesome, higher level entrepreneurs, which was really cool. And 2 got back to me. So it was like, and I've sent out replies and stuff, but how much energy do I do? You know what I mean? That's also another question. So
that's a neat dynamic also. You've been a guest on a lot of podcasts. Haven't actively pursued it like I did for like a little bit. But I also found that I reached out to a good handful. I probably reached out to 20 podcasts and 3 of them got back to me. And I think it's because, and they were various levels of podcasts. A lot of them were new. I think a lot of people ask for guests and they're not ready to receive the guests.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, a lot of people, if they're a busy entrepreneur, they don't really have time. They don't need to be interviewed because they're not really trying to grow their brand, or they're busy doing other stuff.
I mean, good problem for them, right?
Yeah, right. But then other entrepreneurs who maybe aren't at their peak of their game, aren't organized enough to make it to the podcast when we've scheduled them.
Yeah.
Right. So
well, also I reached out to Pete Vargas, he's a great, he's a really cool guy, and he really promotes that people, basically getting a guesting on a podcast is like having a speech. And I feel that's true to a degree. It's, branding yourself in some way people are listening to you. Right. And so I reached out to him, and of course he's gotten pretty big. So I got like 3 assistants to like reply back to me. And, I sent over, our little media kit as to, our realistic reach as well as our potential reach. And so like, how many we usually get, but also how many we could potentially get based off of who is in our network and following. Right. And they replied back. They're like, unfortunately, we can't have Pete on your podcast because you don't have enough people who listen to your podcast. And so I was like, well, I mean, that's fair enough. This is probably the 1,000th email to be on a podcast you've gotten today. I get that. But at the same time, I kind of go, all right, but
had we got him last year,
maybe,
before he took
or
off.
A couple of years ago. Well, really, like 3 years ago. But yeah, so I was like, okay, so we have to find. It's really interesting because where we're at, we have to find that sweet spot of who we can get on our podcast. But we also in our funnel, we have people like, Jerry Robert and potentially Lewis Howes and like his whole network too, so it's like we just haven't quite gotten to them being on the podcast yet to attract all these other people. And at the same time, to get, say, Lewis Howes, Jerry Robert, and everyone else, it's like they're technically past the point of this other guest I'm trying to get. So it's like I'm literally skipping you to go to someone else. So please be on our podcast before this happens, But it's just how you kind of have to navigate the game.
Yeah. And that's I think what we'll probably learn over the next handful of months as well. Like as we bring on, like do more interviews and just kind of see how it goes. I think that's going to be.
I think the first 25 episodes was just learning how to podcast in general and get it marketed. Now our next 25 is like, okay, how can we get the higher profile guests and how do we do the guesting to really work with the market that we think we have? Like we're still trying to figure out our market too,
Yeah.
So it's
I'll say
place to be.
That is, it's a neat thing that I discovered because it was hard at first because there's so many things to coordinate. But once we got the flow down, I was telling you a while ago, I was like, okay, I'm bored now.
But me too. I totally get it.
It's like, I know what I'm doing. This is routine. How can we make this way more difficult?
Yeah. How can we make this more difficult? David, shut up. We're not making this more difficult.
Well, that's what we did when we started also. We're like, okay, what if we added these other 10 layers of things to do? Instead of just one camera angle, what if we did 3 camera angles and an audio file?
Which, by the way, now we're going back to 2. So there.
I know.
But I think, like what you were saying, there's always kind of this scaling of learning that happens, and then you plateau for a hot minute because you found that flow. But now where we're at again is we're kind of at, again, that scaling, but it's with guesting. And so it's like, how do we attract the bigger guests, right? So now there's going to be more learning in that too. Yeah. So, but it's that plateau that can be dangerous for us entrepreneurs because we get that feeling of boredom, and so we feel like we're not progressing in some weird way. It's like we're, what's the opposite of sadist?
Masochistic.
There we go. We're like masochists in the business world. It's like if I'm not in pain because I can't figure shit out, things aren't going right. And that's actually not true.
Yeah. This doesn't hurt, so I must be failing. Let me start over.
And I think that really, again, coming back to our usual theme of trauma responses, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's just funny. So what do you think we're going to learn in the next 25 episodes?
In the next 25 episodes, I think scaling is going to be a big part. The industry is changing almost daily. I don't know if you listen to podcast news, but
no, I don't listen to podcast news. Is this literally news just on podcasting?
Yeah. And because I program my Google Home to tell me the news at certain times, so I can choose what I listen to. And so it'll give me updates on the podcast world. So I've got like 2 different ones that tell me what's going on.
Well, I mean, I'm glad someone's doing that. I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, sure, it's a thing. I just didn't think about it.
Yeah. And so I don't have to search. I just tell my machine to tell me what's going on.
You just tell your robot slave. Yeah. Tell me the news, robot slave.
Robot, educate me. It's like, okay, David, I will educate you. I don't want to say its name because it's next to me. And then it'll talk.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That was one of my problems back when, hey, this is still relative. I was guesting on podcasts or whatever, and I'm in my dining room at the time just because it was more visually appealing. And it was just where I had to be. So, but where I had to have the computer where I was sitting was right next to our Alexa home device at the time. And it was literally in the wall. It's what controlled their thermostat and all that stuff. So it wasn't like a little thing that was just sitting on the desk.
Yeah.
So I'm doing all the recording and everything, and whatever I was saying, somehow it heard Alexa. And at one point, it happened many times. It'd be like, "How can I help you?" or whatever.
Yeah.
And then at one point,
sorry guys.
Yeah, at one point it was like, now playing I Love Rock and Roll. It started playing Joan Jett. And I was like, what? Stop,
This red face.
Stop. It was
awesome.
just really funny. Yeah. So the things you learn when you're not only guesting, but also when you're hosting.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite things is that how we've kind of figured out we can do this anywhere. Like, we did it in Mexico. I've done it when I was at a friend's house. We're doing it in 2 different places right now. I think we're still making it look visually appealing. The sound quality is still really good. And that's like a fun thing that I think, like a fun skill set I've picked up from this is like how to make audio and video good as quickly as possible, literally anywhere.
Right. Good enough, at least, right?
Good enough.
Without getting those like $20,000 cameras or whatever.
Yeah.
That's between episode 50 and 75, right? So
movie grade camera coming up. Right. Here we go. All right, production team, let's get this going.
Get this going. Action.
Quiet on the set. That's gonna be us. Episode.
See, you know those things. I don't know those things. Quiet on the set. That's a thing. I guess that makes sense.
I feel like
don't they just ring a bell? I don't know.
With a clicker. Click. Yeah.
Okay, when you said clicker, I was thinking like a dog training clicker, like click, 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 click.
Like, click. Bad.
Like everybody just starts clicking. It's kind of like the whole like we want everyone to be quiet, so we're all going to like clap in rhythm or snap. So everybody just has their dog clickers.
1, 2, 3, eyes on me.
Oh my gosh! Right. What did I used to do? I used to do like a chant or something. I haven't spoken in a while. I forgot what I used to do. Shoot.
Did you have people snap?
No, I would say. I don't remember.
I mean, I feel like I've seen you speak plenty of times, and I don't.
Right, but when I only had to use it whenever I was leading a group, like an MC at the Fortune Now event. I'm trying to remember what I said.
I was there. I don't remember.
Right, I just started talking, and then I started. It was kind of like one of those, like what you do at gyms, right? You go, hey, yo, and everyone goes, hey, yo, right? The whole queen thing. Yeah, I don't remember what I did, but anyway. Yeah. Back to what we were talking about.
Thank you for listening to another episode of I Don't Know What the Fuck I'm Doing podcast.
We can't do this without you, and to reward you for your support, we would like to invite you to something unique.
Go to beacons.ai/IDKWTFPod to schedule a complimentary 15-minute phone call with one of us.
You can also find the link in the description.
We're here to brainstorm with you on different solutions for your business or life.
We want to hear your feedback about our podcast or even just schedule some time to say hi.
Not only that, but anyone who chats with us will get a voucher for $100 in restaurant coupons.
Schedule some time today, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode.